Hello and welcome back to the Beyond the Scenes podcast. I'm Molly Elizabeth Agnew, the founder of Eternal Goddess. And on today's episode, I'm going to be talking to Selena Ho, the founder and CEO of Recloseted. Recloseted is a consultancy company helping fashion brands to become more sustainable, whether they're startups or established brands. In today's episode, Selena is going to be sharing with us her very knowledgeable insights on how fashion designers can set up their own conscious brand within 6 months and make $20,000 off their first launch. Selena is also the author of the book, The Recloseted Handbook, Your Sustainable Fashion Guide. So if you're looking to be a bit more sustainable with your fashion, then that's definitely worth a read. If you'd like to keep up to date with future episodes of the podcast and more from Eternal Goddess, make sure you're following us on Instagram. So, Selena, thank you so much for joining us. This is going to be a wonderful conversation, I'm sure. Can you start by explaining who you are, what you do, and especially what your background is?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be here. Very excited to talk to your audience. And my name is Selena. So nice to meet all of you. I'm the founder and CEO of Recloseted, and we are the first one-stop consulting agency for sustainable fashion. So we're on a mission to transform the harmful fashion industry. It's also my personal mission. Happy to talk more about that in this podcast as well. But yeah, I know it's a really lofty goal. There's a lot of big ambitions behind that statement I just said, but we work with sustainable fashion brands, startup brands, scaling brands, and also existing companies to help them become more conscious. And that's how we accomplish it.
It's honestly such a genius idea. Consultancy brands and businesses, there's hundreds and thousands of them, but you rarely come across one that's in such a specific niche, but also a niche that is suddenly booming. What is your background in fashion, in sustainability, and in business?
Yeah, so with this, it's actually a really fun story. So I have actually a traditional business background, and I used to work at startups and Fashion 500s. And I was one day at work, and I just felt like I was kind of dying inside, and I wasn't doing what I was passionate about. And so I started working for free, pro bono, for local brands, and it went really, really well. And I really wanted to help them, get them results. And then eventually I was like, why don't I turn this into a business? So it was really organic. And now to round out my skills as well, we have a team of consultants, sourcing experts. And I also think you learn so much on the go. Like, it's nothing against education. I think education is great, but I'm someone just that learns so much better from experience. So to anyone listening as well, like, don't ever feel like a lack of formal education should hold you back. You can get internships, you can work for free. Like, I really think that you can get that experience and learn on the go.
Your interest in fashion, just talk a little bit about that. Yeah. Have you always been interested in fashion? Did that feel like a really natural step to go into that?
Yeah, I've always loved fashion. I feel like it's such a cool way to express yourself and be creative. And I actually used to be a fast fashion consumer, and I was very ignorant. And I think a lot of people are, because people don't really talk about it. And I think lately it's been more in the news and more prevalent. But yeah, I used to be a fast fashion consumer, and it all came to a head when I was wearing a polyester shirt at work, and I was wearing it for hours and hours on end, and I had no idea it was polyester. I don't think I assumed it was silk, but I just didn't know what it was, basically, because I just didn't know any better. And I was wearing it for hours on end, and I developed this rash because I have relatively sensitive skin. And then I was like, what is going on? And I realized it was polyester, and I was like, what is polyester? And then I found out it's made out of oil and petrochemicals. And, I always say that we wouldn't go to the gas station and put that all over our body. So why are we actually doing that to ourselves on our clothes? And that just really led me down a rabbit hole of wanting to find out more about sustainable fashion and what was really going on with our clothes and, what's going on beyond the scenes, like the title of your podcast.
Thank you very much. That pun was very much, I felt like a genius when I thought that one up in the middle of the night. It genuinely came to me in the middle of the night. And
the best ideas do.
Opened my phone and wrote it down. Yeah, honestly, always. So without further ado, let's jump into the topic, which is how a fashion designer can start a new brand in a relatively short amount of time, do it successfully, especially as we're coming out of the pandemic, and even during the pandemic. I set up Eternal Goddess at the beginning of the pandemic. People are doing new things. They're going away from the traditional sense of you have to work for other people and you have to work for a boss and go up the career path. We're making our own businesses for ourselves, which is amazing. But finding the actual useful tips and information out there is really, really bloody difficult, which is why people like you are so incredible and so useful. I mean, it's a big topic. Where does a fashion designer start if they want to create their own sustainable slow brand?
Yeah, this is a really good question. So I would say start by soaking up and learning as much as you possibly can. So quick plug, we also have a podcast. It's called Recloseted Radio. I know that Molly was also listening to it. So I would just binge some of those episodes. And then also we started a YouTube channel as well, which is just Recloseted Consulting. So a lot of free advice goes on those channels. And I would just encourage you to soak up those learnings. But the first and foremost thing you need to do, and I always say, is a few things. So first of all, you need to know why you're getting into this. I really think that's important because, as you know, running a business is really tough. It doesn't come really easily. And so you need to make sure that you know why you're doing it so that when things do get tough, you can keep going. And then the second thing is just really picking out who you're going to be targeting with your brand. I think that people really forget that at the end of the day, it's your ideal customer, your target customer that's going to be paying you, wearing these pieces and actually using them. So you have to really pinpoint who that is. And you can make the most sustainable garment in the world. It could be out of the best materials and you could pay your garment workers a living wage. But at the end of the day, if people don't use it, they don't wear it, you've just created sustainable junk. Right? So you really need to make sure that you're solving a pain point, you're adding value to someone's life so that you are able to actually make a genuine and conscious brand. And so I think that's really, really important. And if I could say anything, it's really figuring out your why, figuring out who your customer is. And once that's done, everything really does fall into place. You still have to put in the work. It's not magic, but it makes it a lot easier.
So for most fashion designers who are really creative, they just want to jump into making the sketches, buying the fabric, doing the sewing, and the initial business side kind of falls by the wayside. Do you have any tips or ways that can help someone to understand how you really start that?
It is really overwhelming because if you think about it, you have to set everything up just like how you set up Eternal Goddess, right? And then at the same time, you're creating products. So it's almost double the amount of work. So we actually have a free ebook if folks want to download it. It will detail all the steps and there's worksheets as well. So everything's there for you. You can just get it at recloseted.com/launch. But there is a lot of steps, and I always tell people too, it's really overwhelming if you think about everything you need to do, from like setting up your business, incorporating, finding a lawyer, figuring out your products, and like setting up your marketing. Like it's a lot. So just take it step by step. Remember your why throughout, and then when you look back, everything would have snowballed. But if you just try to do everything at once, it's a lot. It's definitely a lot of stress and pressure that you don't need to put on yourself.
So jumping off that, actually, the whole creative side and making designs, that's such a personal process that you can't tell someone how to do that. But for me, what's always been sort of the most intimidating thing about business is lawyering up. It's the legal side. It's the boring legal side that you have to do before you can do anything else. Do you have any tips on how you go about that process? Where do you actually start? Because there's so much in front of you, but it all is meant to kind of happen at the same time. Do you start with a lawyer? Do you start do you even need a lawyer?
No, it's a good question. So for our clients, we always recommend you need a lawyer. Do not DIY this unless you are a lawyer yourself. And what you can do is just search on the interwebs for someone in your area. And a lot of lawyers do free consultations. So I really recommend you have a list and then you vet them and see who's the best person for you so that you can just ensure you're comfortable working with them. That's really, really important. And then in terms of the actual legal documents you need, so when you launch, you want to make sure you have terms and conditions and a privacy policy. This will live on your website. And it's essentially the T's and C's are a contract that your customers are entering into you when they buy your products. And so it'll cover things like refunds or exchanges, like what are your policies there. So you just want to make sure you take care of yourself there. And then the privacy policy is something that It's basically every website needs it, and it's how you're handling people's information, like their cookies, their credit card information, things like that. So you need those for launch. And typically, because people like to hear how much things cost, it would probably cost about 1.5 to 2K for both. And depending on the lawyer, depending on the complexity, but that's generally what I've seen. So that's kind of the first set of documents you need, and you just need that before you launch. So I'm not telling you right now just to fork over $2,000. You can kind of save up for it and plan for it. And the other thing is incorporation. So I don't know if the term's slightly different in Europe, but you're just essentially making your business a separate legal entity, meaning that you yourself as the founder, so in this case, like I'm Selena, Recloseted is its own person. And so knock on wood, if we get sued, like they're not able to come after me and my personal assets. And there's also tax benefits as well, because there's usually a corporation tax rate. Anyways, I know all this is really boring, but you just want to make sure you protect yourself legally, and a lawyer will help you do that. And usually incorporating takes another 1.5 to 2K, I would say. But again, you don't need that until you launch. So those are just things that I want folks to be aware of so that they don't get sticker shock. And then I always say the nice to have things are kind of like a non-disclosure agreement, NDA, or a confidentiality agreement or contracts. If you're creating something that is really, really, really unique, then I would 100% put the NDA more in the necessary category and get everyone that's touching your product to sign it. But if you're just making like a typical sweater, but maybe there's certain design elements or something, like I don't know if it's completely necessary, but if you have the budget, go for it. But yeah, that's like a quick overview, but by all means, TLDR, get a lawyer, don't DIY this.
So money, no one likes to talk about it, but and I do actually find from all of the research that I've done through the years on these sorts of things is getting understanding and information about money is one of the hardest things that you can access and get through people. Firstly, it's a case of how much money do you need to start, but then how do you find that money, find that investment? The entire investing and funding process is so vast and confusing and intimidating. Yeah. Would you recommend that people save up some of their own money, firstly, so they can put that into the initial legal system and services that they need to approach? Then getting funding. What do you think are not just the most common, but actually the most practical ways of getting funding? Is it loans? Is it venture funding, investment? How?
Yeah, it's a great question. So this my answer is going to be a bit long-winded, but I'm going to separate it into two sections. So I will actually break down how much I think it's going to cost, and I'm going to preface this by saying that it could vary based on the complexity of your garments. But to your point, Molly, like I feel like people shy away from telling people the actual cost, and then that's not beneficial or helpful to anyone because people go into it blind, and then all of a sudden they have sticker shock because they think that it's only going to cost, I don't know, $1,000, but it's not, right? So I'll talk about how much it'll cost and then how you can get the funding. So in terms of the actual cost, I generally tell people it's around $30,000 to $40,000, and before you freak out, you do not need to fork over 30 to 40K of your own money. I'm going to tell you how you can do it. But in terms of the breakdown, there's 4 categories. So the first one is your business setup costs, which is basically what I just talked about, like the legal costs, the accounting costs, and those are things that typically you don't need until you actually launch. So you can kind of hold off and just wait and save up for that. And then the second group of costs are your production costs. So this is like the design costs, the material costs, and the actual manufacturing or the sewing costs. And for this, for our clients, we typically recommend they only launch with 1 to 2 products. So then that way they can take advantage of cost savings, really knock it out of the park. That's so important for your first collection. And then also, you know, for that regards, like try to keep it simple as much as possible because complexity just adds unnecessary cost, I find. So that's really important. And then based on the complexity of the garment, it could be higher, but we're probably looking at about like 15 to 20K. So that's where like majority of the costs are going to be. And then the third group of costs are marketing costs. So your website, your Shopify theme, we do recommend Shopify, not sponsored, and also like advertising, influencer marketing. And this is kind of just spend what you have and spend what you're comfortable with. And then the last one, which I think is also really important, is your development costs as a founder. So any education you need to invest in or any like coaching or consulting, like this is really important because when you're first starting out, the business can only go as far as you. And so you want to make sure you're not a bottleneck in your business. So if we tally that all up, that adds up to be about 30 to 40K. Like I said, don't freak out. We're not asking you to fork over 30, 40K right now. But in terms of how to fund it, we've always told our clients to do self-funding and pre-sales. And we find that that's the best combination. I know there's other funding mechanisms out there, but just the time and the effort, and also with getting like a angel investor or something, like the timelines sometimes aren't aligned. So they might be looking for a return in 1 year, 3 years. And for a product-based conscious brand that also operates a bit slower, that's just not realistic. So anyway, self-funding and pre-sales are the way to go. And self-funding essentially just is what you were referencing. Basically, you're funding it with your savings or a 9-to-5 job or a freelance gig. So some sort of supplemental income. And then pre-sales is essentially you putting up the products up for sale before you actually have produced it. So your customers are just giving you an advance on the money, or a loan, if you will, in exchange for product. And what we generally tell folks is to do self-funding for the business setup costs, the marketing costs, and the development costs. And then for the production costs, which usually end up being about half or more than half, you can use pre-sales to do that. And I can talk more about how you execute pre-sales if you're curious about that. But that's generally what I recommend. And I know that was a really long-winded answer, so hopefully that makes sense.
No, not at all. It made complete sense. Like I really like the way you structured that. It was very useful. I suppose also using your own money and using pre-sales as a new startup with a first collection, it's the safest option, I would assume, because you're not in debt to other people. You might be in debt to yourself, but you're not in debt to other people, which is far more dangerous. The next step, and the whole finding the right factories, if you're using factories, manufacturers, where you're buying your fabrics and stuff. Do you have tips or like a checklist or things that you think a designer or founder should really look for to make sure that they're working with the right people? And by the right people, I mean aren't horrifically damaging the planet, exploiting people. Yeah, this is a really great question. So I'm doing a few YouTube videos on this too. So if folks want to listen to me talk about this for 40 minutes, because I honestly could, but I know that that's not helpful here. The quick synopsis is that if you're not working with someone that's going to warm intro you, then you need to do your due diligence, because you need to spend the time and the effort required to ask the right questions. So the first step is just to have a database of people and of mills that you can go out and contact. So I would just leverage like the internet. There's also sourcing sites, which is hopefully a really helpful tip for your audience. So it's almost like, think of it like a Craigslist or Kijiji or something, where you post on those sites what you're hoping to make, and then mills and manufacturers can pitch for the work. So it actually makes the search a lot easier for you. So definitely leverage those sites. And once you have a wide net, though, you then want to start asking really pointed questions. So questions around what type of products do you specialize in, because not everyone will make the product that you're hoping to make. So that already weeds out some people. You also want to ask about their lead times, their processes, and see if that works and aligns with you. And then, of course, pricing. So you want to make sure that the prices make sense, and it kind of goes both ways. If the prices are too high, then maybe they're trying to take advantage of you. So you want to do like cost comparisons. But at the same time, if it's really, really low, that's a red flag. And you have to think about why they're pricing that way, So prices are important too. And then, of course, you also, if possible, near the end, want to try to do a factory visit or facility visit. And if you can't do that in person, then even something on Zoom, I think that's really, really important. But if possible, do it in person. And just things to look for are like
like, is everyone's working station like really, really close together? Is this somewhere where you would want to work? Are the outlets kosher? Like, just even little things like that. Just notice if the building seems safe to work in. Do the workers seem happy? Just trust your gut on this. And that's really hard to tell people because it's not hard science. It's kind of an art form, but trust your gut, because if something feels off and something feels fishy, it probably is, and there's probably something more going on.
Do you recommend people that you work with that they try and use dead stock fabrics?
Yeah, so this is an interesting topic. So with dead stock fabric, there's some people that say it's not great because the industry is already producing so much and it's encouraging more production. So there's like that whole side of it. But then on the other side, if there's actually fabrics that people are not using and it's just going to go to landfill, then you're rescuing some of that. I know some people also question the quality of dead stock fabric because maybe there's a reason why bigger brands are not using it, for instance. But that's all noise. I think you need to really go back to your ideal customer, target customer, figure out what they need and what's the best material for them. So let's say, and there's so many nuances, but let's say your target customer is an outdoorsy person. They really need a really good polyester type sweater or something that's like light for hiking, something like that. And it's just not aligned with your values to use virgin polyester and you just don't like what that looks like. However, you don't have the budgets for something that's recycled right now. Well, maybe you go to dead stock, right? Because it's not like otherwise it would have gone to landfill. So there's definitely nuances and intricacies. I really like to say that sustainable fashion operates in the gray, and lots of people like to label things as good and bad and be done with it. But in this case with dead stock, it is gray and it really depends on your situation. So don't be afraid to do things based on what your business needs and what your customer needs, and just be okay with that. And I highly encourage you to be transparent and share it with customers too, and share it with people so that we don't have to operate in the black and white so much. It's very gray and that's okay. We're figuring things out.
I love that so much, and I wish people spoke more about things, not just in general, and general life, but also within the fashion industry, that everything is nuanced, and you most of the time cannot make blanket statements about things. This perfectly leads on talking about your ideal customer, which is how to market to a customer, because this is how you're going to actually make the money back. Where would you say step number one, marketing? Are we focusing on social media these days, or are we focusing on in-person marketing, which is rarer to come across, but wholesaling, putting on displays, pop-ups, etc.?
Yeah, great question. So with our clients, our goal is always for them to launch and make at minimum 20K. And that way they can start to make their money back, to your point, because when you do self-fund, I like to think of it as you not just throwing money into your business, which is what it is, but you're just giving your business a loan and you want to make sure you can pay yourself back. So that's always our goal. And with marketing, there's so many things I have to say, but the first and foremost thing is that you need to plan in advance. Like we always tell our customers, it takes so much time to build a community. It takes more time than you think. And so if you just threw up an Instagram post tomorrow and said, hey, we've launched, like you're going to get crickets, and probably just your mom and your dad and your best friend are going to buy something, right? And that's not a sustainable or viable business. So take at least 6 to 8 months to intentionally build out your audience. And so with that too, we always tell our customers and our clients to do one digital marketing platform like an Instagram, a TikTok, a LinkedIn, whatever that is, and couple that with email marketing. So then that way you're focusing all of your efforts in one place so that you can actually grow those communities. Because when you're everywhere and you're spread thin and you're trying to make your products at the same time, nothing's going to be done well. The content's not going to be done well, and people just won't follow you because you need to add value to someone in order for them to follow you. And in regards to what platform to actually choose, it comes back to your target customer. So I say, Instagram's not the best platform for every single brand, because if you're not there, like if your ideal customer is not on that platform, then don't waste the time, don't waste the resources and the money to be there. And so a really good example is a client of ours. She's a sustainable wedding dress brand. And so for her, it made sense for her to go all out on Pinterest, because her ideal customer, which are brides to be, they're all over that platform pinning things, right? So that worked really well for her. And it's not to say that just because a platform's taking off like TikTok or everyone's always on Instagram doesn't mean that those are the best platforms for you. So same thing, like get quiet, think about what's best for you and your business, and go double down on those platforms and really make sure you grow them over at least 6 to 8 months so that when you launch, it's not crickets and you have people to launch to. I think that's the biggest thing. People just underestimate how long it takes to build a community. And then when you actually launch, you also want to talk about it for like weeks and weeks on end. Don't just do one launch post and never talk about it again. That's not great. From a marketing perspective, I think the stat is you need to see something 11 to 14 times before you buy. Yeah. And so if you only post about something once, people aren't going to completely it's not going to get into their subconscious or their psyche, you know? So it's really important to take the time to do that.
I think it's really difficult because as humans, we have this want for instant gratification, and we want to just jump from, right, I've had the idea, tomorrow I want to be making the money and sending out the parcels and making the designs, and everything is going incredibly. And in a dream world, that would be how it happened. But patience is a virtue, and it is difficult, and it takes so long. Going again to the kind of end product and postage and packaging and sending things out, I'm sure you have thoughts and opinions on how to make that process more economical for the environment and for people's purses. How do you recommend people send things out? Because there are so many brands out there these days that make sustainable packaging, and it's a question of how sustainable are they? How are you shipping things out? Very long-winded way of asking that question, but I'm sure you can.
No, I love it. Just before I get there too, just around the patience piece, that's where the why comes in too, because if you know why you're doing it, that can hold you on, and you can just, it's like your North Star, the bigger vision you're trying to achieve, you know? So with that, okay, packaging and shipping, this is a big one. For brands just starting out with limited budgets, I always say do paper packaging whenever possible and also ship slower. So that's kind of like the very high level one. So in terms of paper, there's so many of those compostable poly mailers or biodegradable poly mailers out there. And the thing I have to say to this is I have a really good friend that's a scientist, and she was telling me that for those to properly compost or biodegrade, they need to be at specific temperatures for a specific duration of time. So it doesn't just happen, like, it's not just like, I kind of pictured like the compostable poly mailer, being zapped or something, and it's like gone. It's like poof. Yeah. But it takes weeks and weeks apparently. So a lot of cities and a lot of jurisdictions don't have the capacity to do that for weeks and weeks. So sometimes it's like half composted, half biodegraded, and then it goes to landfill. So with that being said, try to stay away from them. I kind of think it's a big greenwashing thing. I mean, if cities are equipped to biodegrade and compost them 100%, yes, and maybe in the future if the technology gets better, that would be great. But for right now, please stick with paper as much as possible, recycled paper as well. There's some great brands like Eco and Clothes, they do some. And on paper too, you can get your logo printed on, you can add certain things. So there's ways to make it special, but I really think if you can stay away from plastic and stay away from those poly mailers, that would be the best, just because plastic is just the bane of my existence, and it lasts in landfill for so long. And it doesn't need to be in plastic because you're not technically shipping something super fragile. So just use paper whenever possible. And you can try to make it a fun experience by customizing things and telling folks to actually reuse it or, something like that. So paper. And shipping, this one's hard because if you're a small brand, you're not really going to have any sway in the shipping industry. You kind of just have to play by their rules. So with that being said, I would just try to always choose the slowest option because fast shipping always emits more carbon. That's kind of a general rule of thumb. And just tell your customers up front, like, hey, this is a slow fashion brand. So with our shipping as well, we try to make it a little bit slower so that we don't have, as bad of an environmental impact. And then the other thing you can do as well is you can do carbon offsetting in regards to like planting trees. I will say with this, it's a good first step for a small brand, especially if you don't have the budgets and the money to actually invest in like a full carbon analysis and all that stuff. But don't make claims that you're carbon neutral or you're carbon negative. Like, please don't do that. Just say that you're offsetting your carbon. I can go in a whole rant about brands positioning themselves as carbon negative because they've like bought all these trees, but just make sure you do your part. And yeah, in summary, paper, take it slow and potentially plant some trees if you really want to take it to the next level as a small brand.
So to start rounding out very quickly, take us step by step, like a sentence each through the entire process. Just lay it out, because I know someone somewhere has got a notepad out waiting to write this down so they can get started.
Yeah, so I'm going to try to do my best. Again, the ebook will have everything I might have missed, and then you don't have to rapidly jot it down. But the first step is really just taking that customer first approach that I like to say, where you identify your ideal customer, and then you sit down and really try to understand the problem you're solving, and then you try to make a solution with them. I think that's key, because it's one thing for you to sit there and try to solve their problem, but it's another to involve them and co-create that solution. So that's really important. And then when you have finally landed on something where they're excited, there's not really anything like it on the market, and they're like, give me this product right now, I'll give you my credit card. That's when you know that you're onto something, and that's when you move into production. So with production, you're going to be designing your garments. You're going to be sourcing a material, ideally one material, because if you're doing 1 to 2 products, you can just have cost savings there. And then you're finding your manufacturer. And I say that in a very linear way, but in reality, it can be muddled and it can happen at the same time, and that's okay. Just be okay with that. And then after that, you at the same time too want to start to post on social, and you want to decide what platform you're using, how you're going to build up your email list, and you're going to plan for your launch at least 6 to 8 months in advance. You're going to make sure you have everything captured, like a launch event or anything like that. And then you just execute. And I know I make it sound really simple. There's a lot of work in between, but again, like the ebook will detail out everything if you didn't get all of that.
Thank you so much for talking to me about this. It's been amazing. To finish up, like we did at the beginning, please plug yourself. Where can we find you? The Recloseted Radio podcast, or all of that jazz.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This has been so fun, and I hope that your listeners got a lot out of this and it was helpful. If you want to take it to the next level, just because I could talk about this for hours and hours on end, and I have, you can check us out on the Recloseted Radio podcast. We are Recloseted Consulting on YouTube. We can't figure out how to do like a specialized URL yet, because I feel like we haven't hit 100 subscribers, so help us get there. And then also, like I mentioned, the ebook, which is just recloseted.com/launch. I'm also doing a free masterclass in September. It's at the end of September. I don't know when this goes live, but folks can watch it at recloseted.com/masterclass as well. I'm going to be talking about how to find manufacturers, mills, and also designers, and also how to do marketing. So if folks are interested, it's completely free and available to you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the Beyond the Seams podcast. I do hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to keep up to date with future episodes of the podcast and more from Eternal Goddess, make sure you're following us on Instagram.